Right. Bob Himmelsath, your thoughts on the trade policies and what's going on right now and how it impacts you?
Well, I guess I'm concerned. I mean, I guess I'll start out with the aid package. I didn't want it, but at least I give the administration credit that they understood the impact it's having out here, the economic impact that it's having, at least a realization of that.
Your penny a bushel on corn?
Well, yeah, I mean, penny a bushel on corn, I guess, I don't understand the math behind how they came up with it. Their thought process, as it was explained to me, was that they looked at it from a China standpoint and that we aren't exporting any corn to China. Right. NCGA commissioned a study that showed that there was 40 cents impact to corn price from the tariffs. From what I gathered from the USDA is that they didn't take into consideration, they just took raw corn exports to China. They didn't take into consideration ethanol exports, DDGs exports, or anything along those lines. So to me, that would be the argument I'd have back to them, that they didn't quite look at that. I know that there's some talk, it is what it is at this point in time. I know that there's some talk, if this lingers, that there may be a second round coming later on. And they talked then that they might look at especially like for the soybean guys in some of the fringe states on basis, because you go to South Dakota, the western parts of South Dakota, they're basically you can't sell soybeans. They're basically out of the market. So they think that if they do this again, let's go back to the bigger picture. Let's hope that they come to the table and do some negotiating and get this over with before we get to that point. But if they do that, they are talking about taking basis into consideration if they do another aid package. So I don't know what that means in the big picture. Congressman, maybe you have.
Well, actually, is it okay if I ask a question? I want to ask you, Bob, with NAFTA being, in limbo as well at the moment, what's happened with our corn exports to Mexico? And because we're talking a lot about China, but NAFTA was beneficial for our corn farmers, obviously.
So far, our exports have been pretty good. Our exports of corn have been on a really good pace this year. Mm-hmm. The concern is moving forward. I mean, if you were in the Mexican government's position where they are right now with what's going on, and I know that there's a framework of a deal, but until we get Canada into the picture, there's really not going to be anything final, I don't think. You have to look at your options. Where can we get it if we can't get it from the United States? To me, that's the scariest part is they're looking for other places. If they find other places where they can do it, and I know logistics-wise and all that, NAFTA has been tremendous for agriculture in Iowa. It's just been absolutely tremendous. And to me, if they're looking for other avenues, that's the scary part, because if we lose, we can't afford to lose any of that market share.
That's right. It looks like we're going to have a deal with Mexico one way or another.
That's what we think right now. Yeah. It's a framework.
I agree with you, Bob. I think the long-term worry is, are we getting allowing our competitors to get a foothold in markets that we had such a strong foothold?
I think each day that goes by, we're letting that happen.
Right. Why even create that opportunity?
Yeah.
And quite honestly, look, I mean, first of all, we can all recognize that China has cheated in a variety of ways over the years. There's no question about that. They've ripped off our intellectual property rights for decades. They've manipulated their currency for decades. Not recently, but they have done it, where they lower the currency value so that their exports are cheaper and their imports cost more, and then that affects their trade deficit or their trade surplus, whatever the case may be. They've done that. And the question, though, is how to approach them in a constructive kind of way. My only concern about the way the president's doing it is he's taking a 2x4 to their heads. And I'm just not convinced that China is going to respond the way we want them to, given who they are and how big they are now, and knowing what their history is, and knowing that they're looking in the long run hundreds of years. And I worry that by alienating our European allies, they can be helpful with us when it comes to China. So I just want all of us to kind of be careful about how we're doing this too.
And I agree with that, Congressman. And where I don't like this approach so much either, part of me is also saying, as you said, they've been doing it for years. We weren't getting it stopped. So I can see the feeling, well, this is a different approach. Right. We may not be one that most of us would have tried, but the other didn't seem to be working.
I don't think anybody will argue that China's been a bad actor, as the administration wants to label them from a from intellectual property standpoint, the currency and all that kind of thing. To me, as our organization and a lot of the organizations, the thing that we have to continue to do is, I'll step back a second. All these organizations and farmers and checkoff dollars have been a lot of checkoff dollars, a lot of time have been spent over the years to build these markets, to build these trading partners, to build these relationships. And I can't say that, speak on how important the relationship part of this is to this whole thing. And to me, that's the scariest part about this, is because when we have teams come here from whether it's Mexico, whether it's Canada, whether it's China, wherever it may be, that is their number one concern, is they're worried about if we're going to be reliable and if that relationship is still going to be there. People want to do business with people that they like, and if you're going to, and the approach that the president's taking is jeopardizing that, I believe.
Agriculture becomes collateral damage in a war, a bigger war on other issues. Now, I will say this on NAFTA, if you talk to the dairy people, they say this dairy thing needed to be fixed a long time ago, and for them it really is an issue, a chance to get something fixed. Representative Momsen, you had something?
Yeah, and that's what I was going to bring up. I mean, like the 230% tariff on milk going into Canada. I mean, that's been going on. Dairy producers are selling out. And I just heard recently there was a bunch of dairy producers down in Iowa trying to learn more techniques and technology so they can expand production. So, we're being locked out there. And I think recently they talked about cars, GM and cars going into China is a 25% tariff. So there's our brothers and sisters that are in, making cars. If that 25% tariff was gone, how many more cars could we export to China? Or like in Europe, we can talk about Harley Davidson got upset when Europe jumped it up. Harley Davidson's been living with an 8% tariff now. Well, if that was removed, how many more Harley Davidsons could be built in the United States to ship to Europe? So it's a big puzzle, and everybody's involved, and you hate. I raise corn and beans too, and I've seen what's done to the markets, but when you look at the big picture, we have other people that have been being hurt for some time, and at what point do you say, okay, I'm for free trade. The American farmer, the American companies, we can beat anybody on an even playing field. But when they're not even is when you finally go, okay, if this is how you're going to play, we need to do something on this, because it's hurting our fellow Americans. It's hurting the dairy producer down the road.
We've had lots of talk about China, and that needs to be addressed. Obviously, it's a huge market. I sat in the combine harvesting soybeans this weekend, and I was thinking about that as every bushel was coming in. The one thing we haven't talked about is maybe one of the best ways to get China back to the table is to do business with their competitors. So let's maybe not always be on the defensive, and let's be looking at Japan, and let's be looking at the EU and Vietnam and some of these other countries that we need proactively and aggressively approach to get trading relationships, whether that's bilateral or getting back into TPP or whatever that might be. That's something we need to be doing, aside from obviously finishing NAFTA very quickly and getting China back to the table.
I just wonder, when all this is said and done, we wind up with something that looks like TPP would have. They just call it something else, and we could have just been there in the first place. Jen Lee, I wanted to talk to you because from the Iowa Cattlemen's Association, a part of this Farm Bill debate that gets kind of overlooked is something very important to the livestock industry, and that's a vaccine bank. And I know that that is something that we've needed for some time. We're more at risk in this country from a major disease outbreak than what a lot of people realize. Absolutely, and that's been one of our priorities over the course of this Farm Bill, and worked with our colleagues over in the pork industry as well and other livestock industries to push for this funding for a foot and mouth disease vaccine bank. We've learned some harsh lessons from other livestock industries in the state over the last couple of years, from the poultry industry, and now watching as African swine flu is affecting other parts of the world. And we need to be protected and proactive in making sure that we have the right tools in place to be able to handle any foreign animal disease that might impact us, but foot and mouth disease obviously being one of the ones that we worry about the most. So we have supported appropriations of $150 million for 5 years, which we think is a pretty cheap insurance policy when you look at estimated losses over
over 10 years of over $128 billion for just the beef and pork industries alone. So certainly has been a priority, and we've continued to talk to our legislators about it and been appreciative of a lot of support. It's a pretty easy sell when you talk about all the livestock that we have in this state and how it would really impact not just our state, but really our national economy.
It's one of those situations, if we ever had a major outbreak, then all of a sudden people will be saying, well, why weren't we prepared for this?
Exactly.
And the industry's been trying to get us prepared for this.
After the avian influenza outbreak in Iowa, the Department of Ag here began developing a foreign animal disease department. We appropriated some money to it. They've hired a veterinarian to be a director of that now. That program's evolving. But I think the significant part of that legislation is the partnership that was created between the department and our commodity groups to make sure when we develop a plan to combat avian influenza or hoof and mouth, that those commodity groups are involved in keeping those plans fresh and new. I know as we were developing it, my concern was that we developed this pretty nice program, and I'm going to date myself here, but we put it all in this nice 3-ring binder, and we put it on the shelf, and it collects dust. And in 10 years from now, we take it off, and it's way outdated. We don't have a clue what's happening. So part of the reason that we wanted commodity groups involved was that they'd help keep everybody involved and maybe have some mock drills. But in that regard, I really think that Iowa is way ahead of a lot of places trying to be very proactive in this area of foreign or diseases that could affect our livestock industry.
And the legislature, again, deserves credit for increasing that funding this last year and recognizing the threat that something like that, we saw it in avian influenza, but what happens if we get foot and mouth disease? What happens if African swine fever comes to the state of Iowa? I'll tell you, as the department, we are preparing every single day for these kind of things. But the best laid plans, to your point, Representative, if we're not working with the industry, it's not going to work. So we've been working with the pork industry, in particular, relatively closely, to make sure that African swine fever, should it come here, you hope for the best and prepare for the worst. We're all on the same page of what would those first 48 hours look like, and how would we continue to manage it going forward. So not to say that any of that is perfect or that we will remain unharmed, but we've got to do everything we can to prepare. And you guys have helped support that, so we appreciate it.
And Dow Grooms with the Iowa pork producers, we have seen with these other diseases how easily they can spread even when you're taking precautions.
Absolutely. And I'm just going to go back to Jan Lee's comments, because we've done some really great things at the state level, but I'd just like to go back to Congressman Loebsack, and what we're really looking at is developing that vaccine bank at the national level, because it's something that really needs to cover the country, not just the state of Iowa. We won't be an island unto ourselves if those diseases come to be. And so I know, Congressman Loebsack, that you don't support the House bill for the Farm Bill, or the House version, but the House version on the foot and mouth disease is critical because it creates mandatory funding for that program. So we'd really appreciate you taking a serious look at that. And that's, I think, is what is important here, is that we have to start preparing for those diseases, because the likelihood that they're going to come to the country is very high.
No, and I appreciate that. And that's one of the things I did like about the House bill. There were just other things I didn't like, and I think we can, I don't want to make any prediction, but I think we've got a good shot of getting into whatever final farm bill we have. And no offense to Jan Lee, but pork producers were talking about that long before the cattlemen. And I think you talked to me about that state fair too, Jan Lee, if I remember correctly, where we're going around. But I will do everything I can to make sure we get it in there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're really glad to have the cattlemen along too. It's important for all of us to work together, just as we were talking before about working together in Iowa on issues like this.
It's critical. Thank you.